Next person I'll be calling is the CEO of CASAFINA, Dr. Olufemi Sheyi. Dr. Olufemi Sheyi. Okay. Dr. Olufemi Sheyi. Okay. You're very welcome, sir. Thank you so much for coming today and honoring us with your presence. This session is really on the topic, borrower beware. I know there are many borrowers here. I want to say we should raise our hands. But borrower beware. Finding market-led solutions to Nigeria's mortgage inefficiency. Like I said before, the last session talked about the major problem, which is access to funding. So our distinguished panelists here will be helping us with things to look out for or considerations to actually have in mind when borrowing. Now, I think the first question I'm going to ask all the panelists here is actually whether they feel, because studies have shown that many people do not even know that there's access to funding via mortgage. So in their own opinion, I would like to ask sirs, in your own opinion, sirs, do you think that there's enough knowledge, there's enough awareness about access to funding via mortgage, and why, if there isn't? I'd like to start from my right, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I think the first thing to note is that for someone who has not had a meal, the last thing he's thinking about is how to buy a home. And if you were to take a poll, go to a bus stop today, and I'm not just talking about area boys, where you have professionals who are on their way home, and you were to ask people about the National Housing Fund, I can tell you, without having done any statistics, that you're most likely to have perhaps 1 in 10 people who would be able to tell you how to access mortgages via the NHF. And this includes people whose offices are deducting from their salaries. So I don't want to go beyond the question that has been asked. Without knowing what the statistics are, I have no doubt that probably somewhere around 90% of folks in Nigeria have no clue with regards to the different opportunities that currently exist.
I follow suit also with the submission of the gentleman. And I beg to maybe buttress the point that it's not really a function of the, will I say, the uneducation of the people or their lack of awareness. Yeah, the body to make those information available, yeah, are they doing well enough to make those information available? The last panel, one of the submissions from the last panel mentioned that the mortgage penetration in Nigeria, I think it says less than 10%. Yeah. So if it's less than 10%, that brings us to look at how much information are the mortgage financiers pushing, or how much information are they pulling into the market to educate people about what is available. Yeah, we're not even talking about NHF. You mentioned it's about government, but we're talking about the private guys who are out there. How much are they pushing, and how much are they pulling those information? So I think there's a dearth of knowledge globally, but in Nigeria is worse off.
Sir, please, what's your take?
Yeah, thank you very much. I believe that it's a very valid question when it comes to the awareness of people in terms of mortgages. From Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company, we started full operations in 2015. And since then, we've been providing liquidity to the mortgage banks and even the commercial banks. And one of the things we've been trying to do as well is the advocacy to create more awareness. But we also have to look at it from the culture of our people in terms of savings, in terms of actually borrowing to buy homes. We've been so used to building one block at a time. You buy the land yourself, you mulch the blocks, then you build. Now the concept of buying a finished house is something that we're just beginning to warm up to. And this is going to take a while. We're talking about the nation, not just one family. But it's beginning to grow. We've seen the uptake. Since we started, we've been able to provide refinancing up to 30 billion naira. And I think it's a very good thing for us, because when we started, interest rates were going as high as 22 to 30% for home, to be able to get mortgages for homes. But now it's getting down. We've been able to reduce it by about 5% at least. And this trend will continue if we keep up the pace. The advocacy is something that we all have to start working towards, to inform the people, to let them know that this affordability thing is something they can calculate themselves. They do not need professionals to do it. And this is what we're trying to advocate from NMRC, for people to have the knowledge and be able to, take it further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think to focus on your question, I think there's not enough awareness because, like someone said, the penetration is about 10%. The reality is, if you ask even a professional, how do you access mortgage? Or do you even know that you can access mortgage? The answers you get are a bit not very articulate. So, and I'll give you an example. This year, Abe Mortgage Bank is 30 years. You'll be shocked that people probably don't even know. And this is the work or the core of an institution like this that have been around for 30 years. But the question is, how many people are aware of how to access it? And in terms of how it should be done, I think it's across board. We are doing our bit, because one of the things we are doing our bit right now is that for developers that we are funding on the construction finance side, we try to partner with them to showcase the fact that your off-takers can take mortgage from us. So that way, we push in joint publicity that cut across the value chain, not just you pushing that, oh, there's a property. You are also saying to them, to access this property, there's a mortgage facility that you can get to get the facility. And I think also someone mentioned the fact that organizations deduct NHF from people's salary. I think it's responsible enough for the organization to explain to the staff, this deduction I'm making for you, this is the way you can actually get it back. So I think that information also should permeate through the organization, because they are deducting these monies. That's reality. So they should be able to have sessions and collaborations even with PMIs on how they can access mortgages even for their staff. So I think it's across board, not just regulators or primary mortgage bank that should push the narrative. It should be a narrative that should be pushed across the country. And with that, we will see enough penetration. Even though, like you said, I agree that what we have today is better than what we have probably 5 years ago. A lot of people are beginning to key into it. The culture is changing. But again, there is enough room for improvement.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much for that. First of all, I agree. There's like a dearth of information about mortgage. And I'm going to come from the private sector-led side of it. I think the onus is on individual player in the market to actually create product and to communicate their product. Now, if you take a census now and you say, look, how many of us are familiar with 737? You know, this I think is GT to transfer. If you're familiar with that 737, can you raise up your hand? Quite a number of people with. Now, how many of us have seen an advert of a mortgage bank in the market today? So that is, well, I'm not trying to indict no, the private sector. Now, so there's a challenge with that in terms of, two, product development within the mortgage industry is very poor. You don't even know whether there's a specific product targeting a specific class. Mind you, the demography that we have is changing. There are younger people who are open to financing their home, and we prove it. We started a development somewhere on the island, about 70 unit total, and then we said we're providing a developer finance kind of mortgage. We oversold, and we have a waiting list for that. So there's enough market. The question we now need to ask ourselves is, what is the information we need to give to our market? By the way, I don't think mortgage penetration is up to 10%, because when you say 10%, that means 20 million Nigerians have mortgage. If you calculate it at an average of 10 million naira, the total mortgage industry, I don't think it's up to that at the moment. I stand to be proven wrong. So I think the penetration is far lower than that. But even for the market that can afford the mortgages we have, they are not familiar with the product that is existing in the industry. And I don't think it's going to be like an industry coordinated thing. I think at this level, individuals will now have to sit down and say, how do we communicate what we have? How do we leverage technology to deliver those products? For example now, but before I just wrap up, you're seated here. You can get a consumer loan for 5 million, depending on your income, without leaving this place, without stepping out anywhere. If I want to take a mortgage that is secured by my house, that I'm going to pay 40%, you need to pray, go for night vigil, go to the mountain, get your grandfather's genotype, apologies again. It's cumbersome a lot of time. It has to be, I should be able to get a mortgage without necessarily, going for night. So that is also a gap, and that's why a lot of people are not even interested in, because of the problem that comes with, accessing mortgage as a whole. So information, simplifying product differentiation, and continuous communication. The mortgage industry is large. Ideally, it should be a major driver of the capital market. If you look at other climes, it should be a significant part of the capital market. We're still, very small. So we need a bit more activity on the side of private sector players.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Drawing from all of the contributions I've just gotten, I think we should just not assume. I think we should do a little enlightenment on what mortgage is and what the advantage is of actually getting it quite early. So I would like to ask Mr. Dikwo Adeoye, please. Can you please let us know, simply speak in a layman's language, what is mortgage all about, and what are the advantages of getting it quite early?
Okay. Thank you very much. I think mortgage is just you part financing the home you want to buy. And like you mentioned, some people would have you pay about 40%. We do 30% at the moment. What it means is that if you're buying a house that is 10 million naira, all you need to pay is 30% of that. We fund you with the 70% for a period of 10 to 15 years, depending on your age. And what you then do is that 70% you are paying almost like a rental for the period of that mortgage. What that does to you and why it's important to do that is that today you might not have 10 million, that's the truth. And the 10 million today, what you can buy with it, trust me, because of where inflation is today, you might not be able to afford that property, even if you say you want to continue to save your 30% for the next 3 years. So what that affords you is that you are able to get a home today. The good news about it is that ideally, well, economics say that property is supposed to track inflation. So ideally, if you buy the property today, the expectation is that the capital gain on that property should track inflation as it's going up. So if you can lock it up today, 10 million, it means as you're paying your 70% mortgage over the next 10 years, in 10 years' time, that property is not worth 10 million anymore. It's worth way, way higher than that, rather than you waiting 10 years' time for you to be able to afford the entire 100%. So that is what mortgage helps you to do. It helps you buy what you can't fully afford in that sense today.
Thank you very much. I would like Mr. Oji's take on it, please. What's your take on what mortgage is in the layman's language, and then what are the advantages of actually getting it quite early as you start your career?
Just to buttress what the MD of Abbey mentioned, I think the advantage of starting a mortgage early is that you have more time. Yeah. So in case you fall, you could recover. Yeah. The disadvantage for our client, which I think we'll talk about more, will hit heavily on the interest rates, on the interest. But the advantage is that you have more time to recover, and instead of paying rental, so if you're living in a comfortable house, instead of paying money as rent, which is not coming back to you, yeah, your rental as it is like you're paying a mortgage is your rent plus an interest. yeah, and the house eventually belongs to you.
Thank you very much, sir. So if the advantage of starting early is that you can spread it for a longer period, right, sir? And then you can, so it eases the burden on you financially. I would like to ask Mr. Olatinwo, please. In other climes, we see that everybody says, if you want to buy a house, get a mortgage. You know, it's not a big deal, you know. But in Nigeria here, we see that it's not obtainable. So how can we actually deepen that that sense of awareness, so to speak, and how can we actually make the opportunities actually grabbable by the common men, you know, in the streets?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So at NMRC, when we looked at where we were coming from, we said the best thing is to use the value chain approach. The value chain approach means we start from the point, you know, of land titling to the point where the developers are building, to the point where off-takers would like to buy, and to the point where they would like to take the mortgage, and to now, you know, go through the advocacy to let people be aware of how much they can get from the banks, right from the time they want to buy the homes, and how much they're going to be paying back. So that brings us to the affordability aspect. So the advocacy is very, very important. And just like one of my brothers said, that we need to really go back to employers, people deducting the NHF. We need to go to the communities, to the cooperative, you know, societies that we have, to the market people, and let them be aware that they can actually borrow money based on their income, and to keep saving money more towards buying a house. Now, the previous question also, you know, brings credence to this, because if people start at the early ages, for example, when you come out of school and you get a job and you go to take a mortgage, you have more years ahead of you. And when you spread it, the amount of money you pay back every month becomes very small. For example, if you take a loan of, say, 10 million naira now, and it's going to be for 10 years, you'll probably be paying back about 200,000, well, 90,000 every month. And that means you have to be earning up to 270,000 naira per month. But if you spread it over 15 years or even 20 years, then you probably need to earn just about 150, because you'll be paying back 50,000 for the same amount of money that you borrowed. Also, you would also be getting promotion, because so the advocacy is to start very early, to get people to be aware, to let them be able to even do the calculation for the affordability for the mortgage they would like to take, and to also explain to them all the key things they have to do, the documentation, right? Having the proper title for the property, and being able to now come together to even bring in your spouse or your wife or your husband to do a co-application and be able to provide more liquidity for yourselves, or to show that you have more income so that you can borrow more. So this is really very important. Getting the awareness out there is very, very key. The employers, as well as even the government, you know, coming out to play, because we've been working from NMRC with the government to have what is called a modern mortgage and foreclosure law. With these, the government will go out to all their workers, the civil servants and the public servants, and explain to them the beauty of being able to, you know, take the mortgages, rather than, you know, taking the risk of building houses that they will abandon eventually. Why not go and buy what is already there? You take the mortgage, you don't have to pay for rent. Instead of paying for rent, you'll be using it to do the payment, down payment for your mortgages. And these are the things we're trying to advocate. So the advocates, we need to do a lot more, and I believe we're going to get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. My next question is on the inflation rate, which we know has affected or is affecting every area of the economy. So my question, sir, I'm directing this question to Mr. Gbenga Olaniyan. Please, sir, what What do you think borrowers should be mindful of with respect to the current inflation? Do you advise them to still borrow? And if not, why? If yes, why?
The big answer to that is a massive yes. Because it's straightforward. Inflation right now, in fact, nobody knows where it is. I heard somewhere around 16. I have heard 21%. The only thing that can happen is for prices of building materials to keep going up. And I will tell you this, just as an example. And I was so happy that I met the previous panel. We started a development last year. We actually submitted documents for approval. And the entire cost of the development was to be 1.1 billion. We eventually got our approval a month ago and went back to tender. Same development, same design, same location is going to cost us 1.75 billion. So that's an increase of over 60%. Who do we pass this to? We pass it on to the buyers. But for anyone who had actually put in a stake last year, especially if it is contractual, you can bet that what you have done is you have actually gained that amount of money. So what happens in periods of inflation is that you ensure that you rush in to make a stake in the real estate market. When the opposite is the case, then you start thinking that is my property value likely to appreciate? Now, I'm a valuer. So yes, people will say cost is not necessarily the same thing as value. But nobody's going to build something for 1.7 billion, even if it's 100 homes, and sell for 1.1 billion because you love the buyers. At the end of the day, you are going to sell at the cost price, at above the cost price, as long as you're not the Red Cross or you're not the Girls Guide. You are in need to make profit. So just to round up, at times of inflation, you need to get in early, otherwise you'll be burnt.
Thank you very much, sir. So borrowers are still advised to borrow. That's Ms. Olani, your stake. I would like Mr. Sheyi stake, please. Do you advise that borrowers should still borrow in light of the increasing inflation?
Let me come from the finance side. But in Nigeria, where inflation is double digit, your best bet is to be in debt. And let me tell you why. If you give me 100 million today, and I'm paying you over a 10-year period, by the time I finish paying, the value of your 100 million is probably around 30 million. So I'm paying you in cheaper naira. Meanwhile, I've utilized your money to do what I need to do. So I generally joke with my colleagues and I said, this is the time I want to be in debt. Because if you borrow me 100 million last year and I do whatever I needed to do and I'm paying you over 3 years, you have lost money. You know, so that's without digressing, that's part of the challenge some of our investment instrument that is real estate linked might face. You know, so this is a time to actually go out there and get that facility. You know, with that, let me say this, that, you know, it's very funny. Let's target it. I borrow 100 million. I want to use it for a particular business because I'm dealing with foreign partners, for example. It's just a hypothetical case. I decide to convert to Forex, and the partner says, pay us next year. I borrowed 2 years ago. Say, pay us next year. I'm still servicing my interest. I borrowed at 400 naira. That's per dollar. I changed it at that time. I would have virtually doubled my money. Meanwhile, you are the one holding Abby gave me the money, for example. They are holding the short end of the stick. Their 400 is still 400, but actual value is 200. So if you are disciplined, you know what you're doing. This is the time to take your mortgage. And let me quickly also say this. Part of the argument, a lot of people, when they want to take mortgage, and this is also good for industry colleagues, They tell you that if I take a mortgage for 10 years, I would have paid nearly 3 times the value of the mortgage I'm taking. And I've spoken to several people. There's nobody that has come across my table that I did not sell my mortgage to. Because this is what I tell them. Now, you borrow 50 million for the mortgage. Yes, you're going to pay 150 in 10 years. If I give you 50 million to do business, and I tell you, give me times 2 or times 3 in 10 years' time, are you going to give me that amount of money? Yes, you say, yes, I'll trade with it and probably give you more. You understand what I mean? So essentially, the value that you're preserving is much more than what you would have paid. Your house is appreciating in value. You don't have to commit your cash up front. You can use it to do whatever you need to do. So you are gaining on both sides. So this is the time to actually borrow.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is the time to actually borrow. I would like Mr. Dipo Ade, please. Is this the time to borrow or is it not?
So I'm excited about what I hear because I wanted to borrow, even from a selfish point of view, because that's core of what I do. I want to give mortgage, I want to give construction finance. But I completely agree with what my colleague has said. It's a time where when people understand the dynamics of the dilemma we are in the country, then you know that you need to find a structure that works within the dilemma. You can't run from it. You either position yourself to gain from the dilemma, or you'll be the one holding the short end of the stick, like you rightly said. Because the truth is, I don't see inflation come down, and I'll tell you why. Today, and the number of metrics to it. Today, even government is borrowing at double digits. So that's the starting point. So for finance people, when you start to talk of risk-free, when risk-free is at double digits, where will your borrowing be? So when we hear things like, oh, mortgage rate is too high, it's at 20%, the question is, where do you expect it to be? And they'll point to the US or point to all those things. And I'll tell you, check before now that inflation is rising globally. Check the 30-year treasury of US. It's probably 0 point something or 1 point something. So when you get mortgage in that environment at 2 point something, it makes sense. You understand? But here, when government is borrowing double digits, where will mortgage rate be? That's the reality of our market. But do you need to borrow now? The truth is yes, especially if you are borrowing for real estate. Because, and you know, he mentioned that fact, a lot of developers that probably didn't borrow enough to quickly buy the materials they needed for some construction they started, they will have a significant problem passing the cost, because you want to pass the cost to the client, quite all right. But it gets to a point where the client will be like, man, let me leave this property matter for now because the price is getting too much. So both developers and even the off-takers needs to borrow because inflation is going up. Because prices of food, prices of raw materials will continue to go up. And when that happens, prices of real estate will also continue to go up. So it's a time to borrow. Go out there and borrow.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Mr. Latiwo, sir, I would like to know, Nigeria is a developing country and there's so much we can learn from the developed ones around us. So with respect to the mortgage industry now, are there particular things that, maybe 1, 2, 3 things that we need to already start, like they are the game changers, they are the next, what are the things that we need to actually start taking on board to change the system and make for better efficiency?
So good question. In terms of efficiency, what we're beginning to see now is a technology coming to fore. So we've got the prop tech, similar to fintech, and this is an area where we can really streamline, we can build almost everything into the value chain. I talked about land titling. You can have a system where you automate all the land titling, and it flows straight to the developers, whereby the developers, they have access to the land, and they get all their papers from there. They construct, and the buyers can go and see everything within the system. So as individuals, you go in, you say, oh, this is my plot of land. I know all the documents are complete. Now I want a mortgage. And in the system, it gives you the options of all the lenders providing mortgages, and you can select. And then once you agree, everything flows straight to the the mortgage lender. And even the mortgage lender, they can package the assets and now come to NMRC for refinancing. I'm just, talking through this very quickly. But these are areas where we have almost everything within the same value chain, and we are able to streamline and reduce the cycle time and bring more efficiency. And ultimately, it's going to reduce the overall cost of being able to purchase the house and having access to finance at the same time. So that's one. The other thing it's going to allow us is securitization, whereby we have the cash flow within the system, and it's going to help for people to be able to build the pipeline and also understand what's going to flow in and what's going to flow out, and it brings more liquidity into the system. It would make the properties to be bankable, and you can quickly sell off as well because you have everything within the same ecosystem. It helps a great deal that way. We've got other things that we're looking at, for example, the mortgage guarantee company that will help to guarantee mortgages to say that, okay, you've been contributing, for example, to pension commission, PENCOM, and you can take about 25% of your retirement savings account and use it. And PENCOM will have access and be able to determine to say, yes, we know, we agree, we give him the money to use for equity contribution. So that's going to reduce the amount of money you have to keep within yourself to pay. So far, you are already contributing to the pension fund. And so many other opportunities that are there. But I think I will just leave it at these 3 points. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Orji, please. I would like you to also share with us what are the game-changing ideas that we could actually start implementing in the mortgage system, please.
I'm not in a position to advise the mortgage bankers, because I'm a developer. However, I'll be expecting the mortgage bankers to begin to develop products that are for people who need mortgage, not the people that are actually focusing on now. So you find the middle class, the lower end of the middle class, people, the working class, people who actually need this mortgage. Someone who can afford 200 million naira, a 200 million naira house, a 500 million naira house, and goes to the mortgage bank and he's getting the mortgage. That guy doesn't need the mortgage. In my opinion, reason is this: the guy could as well have borrowed money from the bank at a higher rate. But I want to buy a house of 500 million. I come to the mortgage, I pay 30% down payment, mortgage finance the balance. I have my money. I will spend 500 million outrightly. Maybe I spend 200 million down payment. So I have 300 million to play with. And I can turn that money and do other things. But the common man who needs that money, who earns maybe 200,000 naira, like the refinancing MD said, can't have that access. There are barely products that touch those people. So people come to us every now and then. They want to buy our properties. And we have a mortgage bank that we work with. And they ask us, and they look at the rates, comparison to other mortgage banks and all of that. And the guy is saying 17% every year. How can he afford that? So it's beyond just the interest rates. It's looking at the peculiarities of our markets and begin to design products that fit every one of those markets. Except they don't want to play in that market. Maybe they are playing to the upper class or a kind of maybe the upper middle class. But not for the general mass market. But I expect products to come out for everyone.
I would speak from a different perspective, and I'll be talking about titling. From my experience, I would give you an example. Many years ago, we developed an estate in Shongotedo. And after building, we got our building approvals and everything. The first buyer came, and after trying to process his mortgage through a first-generation bank, at the point of disbursement, they suddenly found out that the entire estate did not have a registered layout. The question I asked them was, what were you watching when you gave us the approval, when we completed the construction and got to this stage? I have seen that prevent people from even qualifying for mortgages. A game changer, because that's what we're talking about. We're now speaking to the government. Unfortunately, I think they're not here. One of the things my company has done for the past 29 years is to buy properties for Nigerians who want to invest in the UK. So sitting in my office 5 minutes away from here, as long as you are able to prove your income, I can get you in 2 weeks a mortgage that is the equivalent of 5 times whatever you earn here. And why do we have this confidence? Because by the time we get the property, you know that out of 200 properties, 199 of them would have solid titles. And even that single one would most likely have a title that can be cured. So that's why I decided that let me speak from this angle of the title, because a lot of us only think about the funding. Now you get the funding. Look, I know someone who ended up closing on the 3rd property that he took to the bank due to no fault of his. And these were properties that had been built, that had building approvals, but there was always something wrong with the title or the other. Because I don't want to take too much time, I'll round up with this. A particular bank that I don't want to mention here so they don't freeze my account, actually told this guy that the only instrument they will lend against, the only title, is a C of O. A registered deed of assignment with governor's consent was not even recognized. So until we really are able to fuse this titling issue, we would continue to have problems. So a major game changer is for the government to ensure they get their act right with regards to titling.
Thank you very much, sir. I would like to get Mr. Dipo Adeoye's take, please. Game-changing ideas what's the next step?
Okay, without repeating what he has said, I think titling is documentation, that's what I'll call it. Because there's a perception that liquidity is the problem, but the reality is that liquidity is not the problem, and I'll tell you why. In the last 18 months, Abe has moved liquidity from 6 billion to about 30-something billion. So liquidity is available in the market. However, like you rightly said, documentation is the headache. And that documentation starts from that titling issue. In Nigeria, you have to look very well when you are funding properties, because you might end up just sitting in court. And when you get to court, you are there for another 10 years. And remember, the dynamics is this. For banking, you take from depositors and you lend to whoever you're lending to. Depositors take their money every year. So if you are in the court for 10 years on the property that you've given loan to, trust me, it starts becoming an issue. So naturally, when the next guy comes, you are more stringent about what you want to give. So, and that, again, I will talk to my regulators, NMRC, and all other schemes that have been done. They are laudable schemes, but I think an element that is missing in the structure of the scheme is the risk. Most of the schemes are addressing liquidity, but they are not addressing the risk. And I'll give you an example. NHF today, if I process NHF in Habe for a customer, and I have that, so I still sign a remittance to NHF, to FMBN today, that customer can default, but I'm under obligation as Habe to remit repayment to FMBN. So the risk is still on me, as if I'm the one giving that mortgage directly. So that way, it doesn't create incentive for you to process NHF. And that's what is happening in the industry, because the liability still sits on the PMI, like I'm doing my regular mortgage. Whereas the margin on NHF for me as a business is probably 1% or 2%. So at the headache, vis-a-vis the risk you are carrying, is not worth it. So what should happen is that all players in the value chain need to sit together and we start thinking before we come up with interventions. We should not just assume there is one thing that is the problem, which is liquidity. Because banks have over how many trillions in this industry, in the market today. Liquidity is there. But when you don't de-risk, and de-risking comes straight from titling to performance of the developer, from off-taker, from even the off-taker that wants to take the mortgage, you need to be sure the employer will not sack the person tomorrow. So it cuts through the entire value chain. So when you can de-risk some of those elements, trust me, you see massive affordability or massive availability of mortgages, because liquidity is not a problem. So tightening documentation and also creating those interventions to de-risk the market, I think those are things we should focus on.
Thank you very, very much, sir. My question is to Dr. Shea. Sir, you just mentioned documentation. Can we just shed more light on that? What documentation actually should prospective borrowers, have in place or be looking out for when they want to actually take up a mortgage or buy property?
Well, I'm sure that he would be in better position to answer that, but I'm going to say this. First of all, there are two sides. There is the property you want to buy, and there's you that wants to buy the property. Those are two kinds of documentation. For you that wants to buy a property, just like any credit, number one is, are you able to pay back? That's the number one thing. And how do you know you're able to pay back is your financial history, your salary, and that's why they would ask you for your pay slip or a letter from your employer. Then they want to verify it with your bank statement. Now, let's assume that today you are able to pay back. The other question that you will be asked is this: do you have a history of paying back? Because that you can pay back does not mean that you will or you have paid back, which is why your credit history is also part of your documentation, even though a lot of subscribers don't think about that. So your credit history is your ability to pay, which is reflected in those documents. Now, the property you want to buy, does it have a valid title? Now, I was shocked when he said a bank would not accept a registered deed of assignment. The legal team in that bank has a problem, because a registered deed of assignment, that like a governor's consent, is a C of O more or less. It's like equivalent of a C of O, But I would also, so that those are, in short, those documents that you need. Now, you are claiming to be a lot of things. They want to know, are you who you claim to be? That's why they ask for your ID. So that is one of the documentation that you need to, are you who you claim to be in terms of age, because they also need to know that if you want a loan for 20 years, by the time 20 years is elapsing, how old would you be? Would you be in retirement bracket, or would you still be able to earn income that you will be able to pay? So those are some of those documents supporting those questions are the things you need to provide apart from the title. To make it easier also, or to make it more detailed, banks could be asking you for, does that land or that development, is there a building approval? Is there all the regulatory document that a developer needs to? So when you are thinking of mortgage, you also want to ask that developer, your planning permit, is it available? Planning permit, depending on the size, some will ask for layout permits, like you said, all the documents that you need to have. But so those are the documentation that will come readily to me. But I also just want to quickly mention something. When you say about game changer or changing the face of the industry, yeah. I'm a bit very simplistic, maybe because I'm not a mortgage provider, and sometimes when you're looking at it from outside, it's easier to see. And I'm going to ask a very practical question here. As we are seated here today, if we all get a text that says that we will give you a provisional mortgage offer in 5 hours or in 1 working day without you leaving your office, quite a number of us would attempt to even apply for mortgage. Am I right? You get a text now as we are. If you say, look, you get it, we'll give you a provisional offer, particularly if you are buying any of the property that is pre-vetted. If I send a text to all of us here, a number of people would apply. So what I'm saying, the essence of that small exercise is to say sometimes when we make the process very simplified, very easy, and like in the palm of my hand, it can change a lot of things. You can imagine sending that same message to 5 million people who would fall into that bracket. How many people do you think, even if 1% apply, even if let's say 10% apply, and they're asking for 20 million each, that is, 10% is about, let's say 1 million. I can guarantee that even Abby will not be able to absorb the demand that will come. When you know that everything I need to do, I can do it online. I can actually apply for mortgage from the comfort of my home. So that might also, maybe it's a bit simplistic. There are a lot of other things that go into qualifying for that mortgage, but I'm just looking at generating that demand for it.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. My final question before I throw it to the audience to ask 1 or 2 questions is to Mr. Audrey. I would like to ask, very practical here now, how easy has it actually been for you to access finance? Can you just share with us how easy has it been to access finance, and what do you think are the ways that the government can help to actually, mitigate or make the process easier, so to speak?
I think it's very, very difficult. If you ask how difficult or how less difficult has it been, so we've been in business actively for about 10 years, up until 2 years ago. We never had the cost to talk to the banks, for financing at all. Our 2 years ago discussion was also stem out of we needed to start building a banking relationship because of where we're taking our business to. But even at that, is a different animal on its own. Assessing finance, I'm not even talking about. I've not spoken to Abe yet. But I know those who are, my friends who have spoken to you tell me how difficult it is. Yeah, that it was tougher than talking to one of the top 4s. Yeah. However, as a developer, we find avenues, to generate our own funds. One of the things we do as a business is majorly doing off-taking for our project. Like gentleman mentioned, they were doing a 1.1 billion project. They already have off-takers, who were committed in that project. When the prices increases, they don't change the price. Those guys are already locked in. So we try to get as many people locked into our project as much as possible. That helps us. We also know, in my opinion, the banks give money to you when you don't need it. When you have money, that's where they come to you. Everybody wants to give you. So what also happens is that we begin to create more appetite for ourselves. So that when they bring those money, even when we don't need it, we begin to generate projects or create things that will ensure that the money we don't just leave any money on the table. We find something good with our project, to put it into. But talking about assessing finance in this country is tough, it's difficult. And what will government do? What would they do?
Okay. Okay. I think this is a good note to actually end this discussion. I want to thank all of my panelists. I also want to ask for, okay, you want to say something, sir? Please do.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I think you need to speak to Abe. That's very important. I think it's good to put it in perspective, to be honest. This is usually what happens, and that's where I think there's a disconnect. Those developers, when they don't need money, they bank with Zenith, they bank with the Big Four, because they want to feel good. But when it's time to access credit, you run to Abbey and the likes. The reality is that you've not built banking relationship. So the conversation will be longer than somebody that is banking with me when they didn't need money from me. Because then, what has happened over the years? Imagine if You are in business for 10 years. Imagine if Abe has been banking you. I know your business in and out. I know the circle of your cash flow. When I'm discussing with you, I'm not discussing with you like I'm meeting you today. So the credit analysis is completely different. I've seen you, I've seen your cash flow, I've seen your credibility. Do you understand? I've seen how money even flows within your account. All those analysis helps to make the conversation very smoother and easier. And the reality is, like I told you, my balance is about 30 billion, fully disbursed. So it's not, bank money is not sitting in the bank. It means that people are accessing those monies. Developers are accessing those monies. So I have developers that have funded their project. They've done phase 1, they are phase 2 and 3 that I'm funding. So, like I said, I think it's important, even when developers don't have need for money, to develop that relationship with people that you think will fund you. Because there are some banks that won't fund you, that's the truth. Some commercial banks won't fund real estate. It is no matter what. So, but we are experts in the business. That's what I would do. So for real estate people, for developers, I would say to you, bank with mortgage banks. We provide normal banking services as well, as more as credit. So that I just want to put out there.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yes, please.
Just very quickly, 1 minute. Listening to the game changer thing that Mr. Gbenga talked about, and Mr. Dipko kind of supported, and being rounded up by Dr. Sheyi, I think it's important to note that we are really trying to work very closely with the state government through the NGF to see how we can improve on land titling, C of O, in the country. We've been engaging them. We know that C of O is less than 5% in Nigeria, which is like the other way around in Rwanda, where they have over 95%. But with this, we're also bringing technology to the front in terms of helping out with the value chain. And I believe you probably have seen House Africa, and Freke, who is here in the audience, is a startup. They're working with NMRC to see how we can really streamline this process. It's very important. Without the C of O, it's difficult to really get a mortgage in Nigeria. So that means effectively we have less than 5% of our properties with C of O. That means you cannot even take mortgages more than 5% of the properties that we have in the country. So it's important that we understand how to leverage on this. And I will be looking at the developers into real estate to take advantage of this and see how to key into it very well right from the onset. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for balancing the discussion with that. Thank you so much. I don't know if there's any question from the audience, 1 or 2. We can still take. Okay, we have one on that side. Any other person's second one? Thank you. Please introduce yourself, and if you would like any of the panelists to take your question.
Thank you so much. Once again, my name is Edmond Anoze from Optiva Capital Partners. My question goes this way. We talk about mortgaging. I think it's a means to, reduce poverty, also to enhance infrastructural development by getting money from the banks. So, but, when you talk about this, I think one of the challenges we also have in getting a mortgage from these banks are the interest rates. And I was expecting something to come from that. Because most times, you find out that the interest rate is always high. And at the end, it's not accessible. So is there anything that we're doing to cut across these interest rates from the mortgage bank? And also, then another question is about the online things that we're always seeing now. Is there any plans to put security in place for such? Thank you so much.
Okay. So, anyone?
So from NMRC, what we're trying to do in terms of reducing this, and I'm going to start from when we started operations in 2015. Like I mentioned earlier on, interest rate was like between 22% and above. But since we came in and we've been providing liquidity by getting a cheaper fund from the capital markets, we've been able to assist our member banks to really get this down by at least 5%. And it can even get better. It can get better. But the challenge is, we cannot really get money lower than the MRC, that's the monetary rate coming from CBN. Also the inflation rate. The inflation is very high, like somebody already talked about. And these are some of the key things really affecting the interest rates. Even if we get the money, the fund at, say, 12.2%, the mortgage lenders that will be providing the mortgages will still have their own markup for their administrative costs and other things. And that's where you're going to be seeing it between 15.5 or 17.5 now. So these are some of the challenges we have. But if there's a way, even the MRC can come down. We're trying to target single digits. We got there very briefly, end of 2020, I believe, and early 2021. But very quickly, the thing kind of moved back up. So these are the challenges that we have. I don't know if Mr. Adipo.
Well, at the risk of being called a pessimist, first of all, financially or economically, it doesn't make sense. I still don't know how we do double digit. That means somebody is losing money somewhere. If you are doing single digit mortgage, somebody is subsidizing it somewhere. So it's going to be difficult. Beyond just inflation, you know, when you are, let me just backtrack a bit. Mortgage is like what everybody see. There's a whole lot of activity behind that mortgage. And a major one is getting money to fund the mortgage. Now, and I'm going to throw it to all of us. If I come to you to borrow money, even if NMRC come to you to borrow money, and they tell you that they will pay you 8%, a lot of people will not invest in that instrument, right? Because generally, we you know, MMM has actually corrupted our expectation in terms of return. So if the retail investor, you now, for example, will not take an instrument that gives you 8%, 6%, so how do we expect the person who is going to the capital market to raise cheaper fund to lend to people who want to take mortgage? But beyond inflation and all, risk of the environment is also priced into any instrument. This is Nigeria. There's a lot of policy instability, a lot of challenge in the economy, so it's even difficult to price reasonably. So a summary of my whole story is we shouldn't expect miracle in isolation. We should look at whatever price we have in terms of mortgage as part of overall environment where we operate. It's going to be tough for now to have single-digit mortgage. You know, I know NHF is doing something in the region of single digits, but you know, significantly that is subsidized somewhere. So it's going to be tough. Maybe a miracle will come in 2023, 24, and then we suddenly discover that we're doing single one. But in terms of practical term, we need to make it clear. It's not likely we're going to have anything. In fact, it's going to be mid to high double digits. And that is the reality that we face.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Quickly take the second question. Briefly, please.
Okay. My name is Adewale Da Silva. I work for Escort Realty. So I have two questions this afternoon.
We're taking one because of our time, please. Apologies.
All right. So I want to know, as regards the NHF and mortgage, I mean, what is the real relationship? Because I have a couple of friends that work in the corporate firms, and really, you just see that employees have actually charged your NHF, and they don't really know what's up. I mean, the accessibility of the fund. I mean, is it instantly? Because I understand that pension funds are actually at your retirement. So I want to know, like, the NHF, are the funds are they accessible instantly, or what's the time frame for accessing the funds from the NHF?
Okay, thank you very much. Sir, please.
Thank you very much. I'll just address that. Just to give you understanding of the relationship. So FMBN, Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, they're the one handling NHF. But they give you the NHF loan through a primary mortgage bank, like Habe, right? So you go to the primary mortgage bank, show your interest that you want to access NHF. Now, Habe would get all the documentation and send to FMBN. Now, the thing is, it can't be done one-on-one. one after the other. It has to be bulk because they want to disperse to Abe in bulk as well. So you have to probably wait for a number of people, then we'll collate and send to FMBN. Now, FMBN have their own internal process that is independent of Abe. So they'll go through their process, do all the assessments, they take their own time, and I won't mention timing to that. So it depends on when they are done with their assessment. Then they are able to disburse to a primary mortgage bank, to Abe in this case. Then we'll be able to unlend. So the timing has to do largely with how quickly they can round up their own internal process and be able to disburse to Abe. Just to give you a sense, I think we've been on a batch of that NHF since last year, and we've not yet gotten disbursement at the moment. What I had to do for my client was that we had to now give them a commercial mortgage as a bridge so that they don't lose the property that they want to access. So that then when the NHF disbursement comes, then we can then close that bit and they're able to just continue with NHF. So that's the process.
Okay, sir. Because of time, okay, then we'll have the very last comment from Mr. Olatinwo.
Okay.
Briefly, please, sir.
Let me just summarize this way. You can apply for NHF now. It might take you a year to get it, but you can apply. You don't have to wait until retirement to actually apply for it. This is the time to apply. If anybody is actually contributing, please apply today, preferably to have a mortgage.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Olatinwo, the very final thoughts on that, please.
Okay, so on NHF, just like they've rightly mentioned, it's been managed by Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, and this process is initially very simple, but all the internal things they do could be a bit more complex. So the first thing is you must be contributing and you must be a contributor for at least 6 months. Then thereafter you can apply. When you see a property to buy, you get the letter of offer, then you approach the primary mortgage bank, like Abe, as an example. They will help you package it, get all your details, your documents, your salary and everything. And you probably have to also register with them to have an account with Abe, because they're not going to follow it up for you if you don't have an account with them. So you have to be one of their customers. Thereafter, they put it in the batch of about 5 or 10 and now sent to FMBN. Now, the internal process within FMBN might take 1 year, 2 years. Personal example, even though I know all the hierarchy there, I applied since 2018, got the board approval in 2019, till date, it has not been disbursed. But perhaps because I've not been following up. But again, why should I follow up once I register and I put in and I have all the details? But just to give you an example of what could happen. But I believe some people are getting it. Now, you have a maximum of 15 million that you can take from them, and I think there's no minimum anymore. They've also made it easier for people that would like to take minimum of 5 million to say you do not need equity contribution. So with 0 down payment, you can get 5 million. But then the maximum you can get is 15 million. So if you want to buy a home that is more than 50 million, be ready to pay some money from your pocket, as well as the equity contribution of 20%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we just give a round of applause for our distinguished panelists here? They've been so kind to share their wealth of experience with us and knowledge with us. If there's anything that you've gained today, is that the time to borrow is now. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone again and thank my panelists. Thank you so much.